Hello guys, how you doing? So today I'm going to be reading a little bit about yoga from a Stephen Cope book that I'm really enjoying. Hope you enjoyed too. Let's get right to it. It's about samskaras. Samskara, subliminal activator. Every action based on craving or aversion leaves a subliminal impression on the mind. These impressions are called samskaras, or literally subliminal activators. Yogis sometimes think of these subliminal activators as being pressed into the hot wax of the mind. So, for example, my craving for the muffin was deeply pressed into the subtle parts of my mind and body. Some scars are like little tracks, little vectors, little ruts in the muddy road. The next time the car travels that road, these muddy ruts will have hardened into permanent fixtures, and the car wheels will want to slide into them. Indeed, it's easier to steer right into them than to try to avoid them. Yogis, not having cars, have used a different metaphor. Samskaras are traditionally described as seeds. When samskaric seeds ripen, they release a subtle new volitional impulse into the mind stream. These seeds are powerful unconscious motivators of action which lead to an unconscious repetition of old actions. In this way, the self is bound by its previous actions, or as the Buddha said it, we are heirs of our actions. Samskaras remain latent in the mind until they are triggered by some life circumstance into releasing the fruit. My first banana muffin planted a seed which ripened when the next batch of muffins arrived. After a year or so, that one small seed had grown into a very sizable tree with hundreds of new seeds of its own. This process of ripening and multiplication of seeds is sometimes called proliferation. The moment of freedom that we examined in the last section, the muffin moment, now becomes more complex. The reactivity of the mind to any stimulus is highly conditioned by past experience. We have to add a new vector, a new variable into our diagram, the vector of conditioning. Over time, certain objects and experiences in our lives become charged with memories and associations, both negative and positive. Many of these are entirely unconscious. In my relationship with muffins, what had initially been a conscious act of choice soon became highly conditioned. This unconscious conditioning can trigger chain reactions in the body which detonate an intense series of actions and reactions, either positive or negative. Reactions to reactions may go on intensifying long before they are detected by the unattuned mind. And that series of reactions becomes part of our perception of the external object. Patanjali comments on this process. People perceive the same object differently, as each person's perception follows a separate path from another's. Our conditioned awareness begins to interact with external reality, modifying what we think of as objective reality through the complicated history we have with it. Susan's reaction to chocolate cake is not really so much about the chocolate cake itself as about her own history with it. The patterning of her own brain chemistry. Each of us has complex histories of attraction and diversion that ignite the chaining of appraisal, impulse, action in ways that seem beyond our control, and that appear to give the object itself enormous power over us. We each have certain sexual histories that result in powerful repetitive sexual fantasies. We have aversions to certain kinds of people or behaviors, even the brief appearance of which can drive us wild with antipathy. We have inexplicable attractions to objects whose roots lie deeply buried in our past. In fact, as we will come to discover, our own perception of the so-called object world is not objective at all. It is deeply distorted by our history with it. We will also discover that in the fast pace of our lives, the line between object and subject becomes blurred. Because much of what we think of as our relationship with an object is really about our relationship with our own neurobiochemical patterning. We own our actions, said the Buddha. We inherit our actions. We are our actions. The yogic view of karma is not even remotely like our popular westernized concepts of it. Influenced by our mainstream views of karma, we may make it up. For example, only half jokingly, that if we tease our vulnerable youngest sister, we'll spend our next lifetime as guinea pig kept in a cage by a sadistic 10-year-old boy. No. The laws of cause and effect are so clearly enunciated by Patanjali have more in common with the laws of contemporary physics, which portray the way in which all effects have a cause and all causes have an effect. At the heart of Patanjali's view is a radical insight. All actions in the world are interrelated and interdependent. We create our world through our actions. Every act has a power to change the entire field of mind and matter. The universe is like one big sweater. Each one of us is knit into it. When you tug on any part of it, the whole sweater moves. The laws of karma account too for the fact that our actions are based on our perceptions, and our perceptions have been shaped by our earlier actions. It's all a great loop. We own, inherit, and are shaped by our actions, and our actions are profoundly influence our perceptions of the world in which we live. We create our minds, and then our minds create us. It's as simple and as complicated as that. We see the world not as it is, but as we are. Our collective inquiry had now brought the group squarely to the central problem which yogis all concern themselves: the direct connection between dukkha and the inability to perceive reality accurately. As we sat around the fire, I could feel everyone bearing down on this thorny set of issues in order to understand them. Our reactions to many stimuli are programmed and hardwired through the processes of development and further programmed through ongoing conditioning. The result is that we perceive not what is there, but what we expect to perceive. The very instruments of perceptions are programmed to see reality in one highly patterned fashion, and it cannot see any other. We see over and over again in our experience only what we already believe to be true. Contemporary brain researchers have demonstrated to the many concrete ways in which this is true. Nobel Prize-winning researchers David Hubel and Torsten Wiesel devised a study involving newborn kittens. The kittens were divided into 3 groups, each placed in a different environment during the critical few days when they were opening their eyes and when sight was developing. The first group was placed in a white box painted with horizontal black stripes, the second in a white box painted with vertical black stripes, and the third in a pure white box. The imprinting of those critical first days stayed with the kittens for life. The kittens, raised in a world with only horizontal stripes, could not properly see anything vertical. They routinely ran into chair legs or other vertical realities which they literally could not perceive. The kittens raised in a vertical world could not see horizontal lines. The kittens raised in an all-white world were even more disoriented and had difficulty relating to any object correctly. We see the world not as it is, says the Talmud, but as we are. Cognitive psychologists have discovered that most of what we perceive is a function of the perceptive apparatus. That is to say, in yogic terms, the accumulation of samskaras. It is not just that the mind cannot see certain aspects of reality. The infrastructure of the brain and nervous system, shaped by the forces of development and conditioning, is actually not capable of perceiving the way it is, only the way it was, and the way we expect it to be again. Our interneural connections develop as a result of our initial sensory experiences, and along the way we develop our own consistent interpretations of these experiences. Psychologists have found that the nervous system and the brain continue to reinforce these interpretations over and over again, as if the only reason for the nervous system was simply to reinforce a picture of reality that we already have. This process involves not just visual perception, as in the case of the kittens, but all kinds of patterning of experience. Though this process sounds complex, it's actually quite simple. The synaptic connections that are used become reinforced. One of my first yoga teachers had an elegant way of saying this. What you practice gets stronger. What we didn't know until recently, of course, was that the patterned use of synaptic connections physically changes the brain. These patterns become structure into the brain itself. The brain is more plastic than we used to think. We'll look at this more in detail in Chapter 10. Our nervous system then simply serves to project the internal architecture of the brain onto external experience. The shape of this world, the look of it, the feel of it is actually a function of our own nervous system. There is a crack in everything, says Emerson. Is this the crack in the design of the human being? Well, that's something that we can ponder. And, I'll keep going with the next one. Let's see what that. It's just a short while, and I think this is worth pondering about. By the way, I know my British can be... I don't know, I'm just playing around. Let's go back to our model of stimulation at the 6 sense doors in Chapter 6. In order to manage the sheer volume of this input, 60,000 thoughts daily, the human mind must organize experience into predictable patterns. Our minds are then cued by small parts of a pattern into perceiving the entire thing. Yogis were perfectly aware of this. It spawned one of the great overused teaching stories of all time, the elephant and the 5 blind men. Most of us know the story. The blind man, feeling only the leg of the elephant, thinks the unidentified object in front of him is a post. The blind man, feeling only the tail, thinks the heretofore unidentified object is a switch, and so on. From one small piece of experience, our brains and nervous systems cue an entire pattern. Based on past experience and conditioning, none of the blind men perceived the object accurately. We're all blind. It gets even more convoluted. Samskaras, as they actually show up in our lives, are not just single impressions, but complexes of linked activators which, when combined into groups, are called vasanas. In the yogic description, these vasanas, these groupings of subliminal patterns, are much like Carl Jung's notion of the complex with an original wound at the center. Jung believed that certain early experiences, often difficult experiences, organize our view of reality so profoundly that they become unconscious hubs of our internal organization, providing a kind of hidden center around which thoughts, feelings, and behaviors rotate. In his view, much of psychotherapy involves a kind of unpacking of these complexes. Yogis saw the development of psycho-mental structure in much the same way. They, too, found that these highly charged patterns, samskaras, over time draw in layers of more and more complex reactions or clusters of habits, vasanas. Early on in the second part of the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali states the classical yogi view of karma, samskara, and the root of suffering. The causes of suffering are the root source of actions. Each action deposits latent impressions deep in the mind, to be activated and experienced later in this birth or lie hidden awaiting a future one. So long as this root source exists, oh my God, where was I? Totally lost my track there. Oh yeah. So long as his root source exists, its contents will ripen into a birth, a life, and experience. This life will be marked by delight or anguish in proportion to those good or bad actions that created its store of latent impressions. Each vasana can be thought of as a kind of karmic blueprint which emerges full-blown at the proper trigger. In the case of Desperado, for example, this trigger could be Jake's rising fear of being overwhelmed by his latent intimate attachment. For Food Pig, the trigger could be Susan's unbearable feelings of powerlessness with her parents. These initial triggers set off a chain of linked detonations. Boom, 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 kabam! Sylvester the cat flattened by a cast iron skillet for the millionth time. Why do we enjoy watching Tweety Bird and Sylvester play out the same entirely predictable patterns over and over again? Because we do it day in and day out ourselves. It is so very human. The distance between the cartoon and the reality of our own lives is shorter than we'd like to think. Scientists have now begun to unearth the biochemical data for precisely the kind of relentless, samskaric patterning that ancient yogis described. Psychologist and teacher Richard Schwartz, in his groundbreaking work on atonement patterns, says, neuroscientists speak of states of mind, or modules, as discrete clusters of related mental processes that are linked into cohesive submind-like states. The brain is designed to form these clusters, connections among certain memories, emotions, ways of perceiving the world, and behaviors, so that they stay together as internal units that can be activated when needed. For example, neuropsychiatrist Daniel Siegel writes that a fearful state of mind, miscatastrophe for example, clusters together a state of heightened caution, focal attention, behavioral hypervigilance, memories of past experience of threat, models of the self-victim in need of protection, and emotional arousal alerting the body and mind to prepare for harm. On the night of his enlightenment, the Buddha said, I have seen the builder of the house. It was precisely this subtle construction of pattern that he saw. The witness had become so powerful that he now saw the way in which character and personality are actually designed, and built one samskara at a time into a house of complex and intractable patterns. But that night, the Buddha discovered that when we see through these patterns, we can devise a strategy to dismantle them.